My second reading is an excerpt taken from the Nazi Ideology and the Holocaust, pages 12 to 13. Hitler was convinced that he had found the key to comprehending an extraordinarily complex world. He believed that a person's characteristics, attitudes, abilities, and behavior were determined by his or her so-called racial makeup. In Hitler's view, all groups, races, or peoples, he used those terms interchangeably, carried within them traits that were immutably transmitted from one generation to the next. For better or for worse, no individual could overcome the innate qualities of race. Although most people accept the notion of an individual human impulse to survive, Hitler, like other social Darwinists, believed that all members of a race or ethnic group shared a collective instinct for survival. In his view, the continuation of a race primarily depended on the ability of its members to pass on its innate characteristics to succeeding generations. This notion translated to an abhorrence of intermingling between peoples, because it would lead to the pollution of the distinguishing elements of the race and, in turn, to the degeneration of its very nature. According to this thinking, this process could, over time, threaten and potentially extinguish an entire race. The second element in Hitler's theory of survival involved the need to acquire living space. Each race, he asserted, was driven to struggle with others for room in which to grow and for resources on which to thrive. Every being strives for expansion, he said, in a speech in Erlangen, Germany in November 1930, and every nation strives for world domination. Those who were successful in this territorial competition would continue to expand their numbers, thereby overwhelming the smaller populations around them. The lesser races, weakened by a lack of living space, would eventually stagnate and die out. In the end, he judged the success or failure of each race by the size of its population and the area of territory it controlled. A great nation occupied a huge area of land. A weak one held little or none. The roadmap to racial survival depended not on peaceful coexistence with one's neighbors, but on defeating them in the quest for limited resources. In Hitler's mind, however, the struggle for survival was not a neutral contest in which all races were different but equally entitled to supremacy. Instead, he believed in a hierarchy of racial groups in which some were inherently gifted, possessed of traits such as integrity, intelligence, and beauty, whereas others were fundamentally flawed by nature and were devious, stupid, or ugly. Because he held that all racial groups shared the same drive for collective survival, competing against one another for finite resources and space in which to grow, and because he thought that racial mixing diluted good characteristics and spread bad ones, Hitler viewed those races at the top of the hierarchy as being at risk of infiltration and destruction by those at the bottom. To survive, a superior race must not only separate itself from lesser ones, but also continue to suppress and dominate those who would threaten to overtake it.